Hello, ninth grade. Today we are reading The Legend of Kate Shelley from Railroad Avenue. This is on page 56 of your Themes in Literature textbook. I'm going to read an intro to you. This is not in your book, so just listen. Have you heard how a girl saved the Lightning Express? Of Kate Shelley, whose father was killed on the road? Were he living today, he'd be proud to possess such a daughter as Kate. Ah, 'twas grit that she showed on that terrible evening when Donahue's train jumped the bridge and went down in the darkness and rain. This stanza comes from the poem Kate Shelley by Eugene J. Hall. It tells the story of a girl who helped save hundreds of lives in 1881. The courage Kate showed made her a legend in her own time, but the brave girl gave the credit for the rescue to God, who had given her the strength to face death. Now I'm going to read from the tan box at the top of 56. Having already seen one train go down, 15-year-old Kate Shelley realizes that hundreds of people on the midnight train are unwittingly speeding to a watery grave in the swollen Des Moines River. To stop the train, she must reach the station on the other side of the river, a raging river that can only be crossed by crawling across a trestle bridge in the midst of a howling gale. Here we go. Sometimes a single heroic deed lifts an individual from obscurity and creates a legend that Railroad Avenue likes to remember. For such a case, I take you back to a stormy summer in 1881, to a small and very plain frame farmhouse that stood beside Honey Creek near Boone, Iowa, about a mile and a half from the point where the tributary stream poured its turgid waters into the Des Moines River. This cabin also adjoined the Chicago and Northwestern Main Line and commanded a view of the railroad bridge spanning the creek. From one of its few windows, Mrs. Michael J. Shelley had often watched her husband, an Irish immigrant born in Tipperary, go trudging down the tracks to his day's toil as a section hand. Mike had held this job on the C&NW for 13 years, leaving behind him when he went to glory on December 1st, 1878, a capable and energetic widow with 5 children, Kate, James, Mame, Margaret, and John, and a shack encumbered by a mortgage. Kate, the oldest, was a short, stocky, pleasant-faced girl of 15, deeply religious and inured to labor. Some popular accounts add to her accomplishments that of caring for a semi-invalid mother. Page 57. But the latter is a myth, according to John J. Shelley, youngest of the children, who is now a passenger trainman on his father's road, residing at Boone. John is proud of his famous sister's memory and sees no reason for embellishing it with fiction, especially at the expense of their mother. Mother enjoyed very good health most of her life, he tells me. She lived until September 5th, 1909. John was 6 when Kate made the headlines. He says that night stands out in his mind clear as a bell. Not only that, but he recalls vividly subsequent events connected with his sister's bravery and was brought up, you might say, in the Kate Shelley tradition. I am grateful for his help in preparing the narrative that follows. As darkness fell with thunderclaps and lightning glare in the late afternoon of July 6, 1881, and farmers hurried through their evening chores, the widow Shelley and her brood huddled together in their home, gazing out anxiously at the black clouds and the rain that was already slanting heavily across the countryside. Although they did not know it then, the river was going to rise 6 inches within an hour, and before morning, 11 of the 21 bridges in Des Moines Valley would be swept away by flood. Kate shuddered as she observed that the creek had become a raging torrent which threatened to undermine the Shelley stable, halfway down the slope in which the livestock had sought refuge. The girl slipped into her coat, donned a straw hat, sloshed through the river that was tumbling down the hillside in rivulets, while sheets of gusty rain beat down on her, opened the stable door to let the horses and cows shift for themselves, and before dashing back into the house, rescued some baby pigs that were vainly burrowing for shelter in a haymound. The old clock ticked away the endless hours as night deepened. There was no let-up in the fury of the elements. Fascinated by terror, nobody in the Shelley family felt like going to bed. The younger children dozed fitfully, but Kate and her mother watched and waited for trouble that was almost certain to come. Honey Creek was still edging higher and higher. It carried on its frothy bosom bits of flotsam that lightning flashes revealed as fence posts, boards, and uprooted trees. Apprehensively, they wondered how long Honey Creek Bridge and the great wooden trestle that crossed the Des Moines River could stand the strain. Shortly after 11 o'clock, Kate and her mother heard a train rumble onto the creek bridge and discerned through the rainy blackness the stab of a headlight beam probing uncertainty. This train was the helper engine that had been stationed at Moingona on the far side of the river bridge to aid in pushing heavy freights up the grades on both sides of the Des Moines. Ed Wood, engineer, George Olmsted, fireman, Adam Agar, brakeman, and Pat Donahue, section boss, were under orders to run to Boone and return to Moingona regardless of all trains. Kate, being a railroader's daughter, knew all these men and was familiar with their work. Cautiously, the locomotive, running light, backed down the track, with the brakeman and King Snipe standing braced on the running board behind the tender, peering into the darkness for washouts. Kate saw the engine begin to cross Honey Creek Bridge that was now swaying crazily, and distinctly heard the engine bell toll once, twice, and then, "Oh, Mother!" she screamed. "They've gone down!" It was true. A terrific crash and gurgle and the hiss of escaping steam arose above the wail of wind-driven rain. What followed can best be described in Kate's own words. It seemed as still as death, as silent as the grave. The storm and all else were forgotten, and I said I must go to help the men and to stop the passenger train that would soon be due at Moingona, the midnight train from the west. That part is a line to know. Keep that in mind. Remonstrances were of no avail. I felt I had to go. I believed that God makes strong the weakest and makes the poorest of us able to endure much for his merciful purposes. When they found that I would not be dissuaded, Mother said, "Go then, in the name of God, and do what you can." Quickly, she put on her coat and straw hat, fixed up an old lantern by using a piece of felt skirt for a wick, and darted out, while the rest of the family, now fully awake, gazed after her fearfully. Page 58. Finding that the deluge had risen far above all paths and roadways, with the farmhouse yard resembling, as Kate put it, the inside of a huge oval bowl filled with water which extended over the railroad track, the girl realized she could not walk the track to reach the collapsed bridge. So she climbed the bluff at the rear of the cabin and made a curving detour to the southwest, to a spot where the C&NW cut through the low hills. The roadbed was not flooded there. On it, she ran to the bridge. Reaching the scene of disaster, she saw that part of the bridge still remained. She swung her feeble lantern and shouted as loudly as she could. Then she listened. A faint answer came from below, from the engineer, Ed Wood, and his brakeman, Agar. She distinguished them by jagged lightning that ripped the sky for a brief instant. The two men had escaped drowning by clinging to some driftwood and drawing themselves above the swollen creek onto overhanging trees, but their two companions were lost. Kate saw that the engineer and the brakeman were safe for the time being. She shouted down to them that she was going to Moingona to get help for them and to flag the passenger train. They did not hear her above the roar of flood and storm. Neither could Kate understand the words they hollered up to her. The Midnight Limited was almost due. She dared not wait another second. Turning westward, she followed a rough, slippery path beside the creek. Moingona was only a mile away, but between her and the village lay the sullen Des Moines River, which was now so gorged that it almost lapped the ties on the long wooden railroad bridge, while the structure itself shook repeatedly from the violent rush of water. There had been a brief lull in the tempest, but now it lashed out again with renewed fury. Kate had long since been drenched to the skin. She tried to think clearly. The only route to Moingona lay across that bridge, at the risk of death to herself. But if she did not get there and in time, that trainload of human beings was doomed. But what if the express should catch her on the bridge and roll past in the blackness onto the broken Honey Creek span and down into the turbulent stream, the coaches filling with water? These fears tortured the trackman's daughter as she buffeted the wind and rain. Her strength drained away and stood at last on the river's bank. Although pedestrians were strictly forbidden to cross the railroad bridge, Some reckless souls had been ignoring this rule, and so to discourage the violation, a bridge and building gang had taken up some of the plank walk that originally had been laid for the benefit of CNNW employees. Even in pleasant weather and broad daylight, there was peril in crossing that bridge. What then must have been the danger on a wild, starless night, with rain making the ties slippery, wind blowing a gale, and just below, a thunderous, boiling river higher than Kate had ever seen it before, and filled with debris tossed about like matchsticks? How the child of 15 finally reached the other side of that structure is a saga on the steel trail that men still talk about. The gale extinguished her dim light. She stumbled and slipped her way from one tie to the next, still clutching her now darkened lantern. The belief that a higher power was guiding and would help her to stop the oncoming train kept alive her courage as she proceeded desperately ahead. No, she did not run. She did not even walk. She crawled. On hands and knees, she fought physical and mental terrors as she pushed ahead for about 500 feet to the far side of the bridge, groping through darkness, her lips trembling in prayer. From time to time, her skirt became entangled in spikes, nearly toppling her off balance. Other spikes and splinters cut and bruised her hands and knees. Every moment she was fearful of seeing the headlight of the eastbound Limited shine full on her face. Panic gripped Kate when, about halfway across, she saw a huge tree, its roots thickly matted with earth clods, bearing down upon her like a giant battering ram. The tree was so big that she felt sure it would engulf and drag her down to a watery grave when it smashed the bridge. But somehow it passed harmlessly between the piers, spraying her with leaves and spume, and she continued to creep toward the end of the bridge, which appeared so very far away. Finally, after what seemed hours, she stood on solid embankment and paused a moment to catch her strangled breath. Then she attempted to run at top speed to the Moingona depot, half a mile away. She never could recall afterward how she tottered into the station, wild-eyed, hatless, and disheveled, and gasped her message. Someone said, "The girl is crazy." She must have looked that way. The few almost incoherent words she uttered were enough for the agent. He did not need a blueprint nor book of instructions to tell him what to do right away. Grabbing a red lantern, he dashed outside just as an engine whistle announced that the express was rolling through. There, before his eyes, a headlight shone like a ghostly glare in the rain. His frantic signal brought the train grinding to a halt, the train that normally would have sped through Moingona without even slowing down. The engineer descended from his cab, ready to bawl out the agent for stopping in hotshot at a small way station, and on such a night. The conductor swung off too, his brass buttons faintly reflecting the glow from the station windows. And soon the passengers, sensing that something was wrong, also piled out of the cars. All were eager for Kate Shelley to tell her story. The girl gave vent to a torrent of words. Its effect on her listeners was electrifying. Men cheered, women wept. Several persons flung their arms around the young heroine and kissed her. Then someone in the crowd passed a hat. Soon it was half filled with silver and greenbacks. There were nearly 300 persons on the express that night. I do not believe that one adult failed to contribute. But Kate had not forgotten Engineer Wood and Brakeman Agar, clinging to a precarious perch on the flood-ridden bank of Honey Creek. The engine whistle blasted a series of short, sharp notes, an alarm to the townspeople, and in a few moments, men with rope and other equipment were on their way to succor the marooned railroaders. Kate accompanied the party across the river on the engine, which inched along slowly, and guided them to the spot. It was some time before Ed Wood could grasp the rope that was tossed to him repeatedly, but when he did so, he fastened it to his tree and gingerly came ashore, hand over hand. His comrade, Brakeman Agar, could not be reached that night. Finally, after the water begun to subside, he was also assisted back to safety, utterly worn out by long exposure. Wow. Now, take out a clean sheet of paper and answer Think It Through questions 1 through 3 on page 59. See you in class.